And for more on this, we're joined now by Ivan Elan, Senior Fellow at the Independent Institute. So, Ivan, obviously the latest news is a group of U.S. retired military officials is encouraging the Obama administration to get rid of the embargo on Cuba. They say that, the original point of this was to sort of encourage a revolution against the Castro regime. Clearly that didn't work, and if anything, it's actually created more anti-American sentiment because the Cuban government, whenever the people are suffering, say, hey, it's all because of that embargo that the United States put on us. I mean, do they have a point?
Yes, I think I'd go farther than that. I think that Fidel Castro has been able to stay in power purely because of U.S. policy. He uses this, and many leaders do when they're put under sanctions, to rally around the population. If your country's getting bombed, certainly you support your leader. This is sort of an economic warfare. You still, it's not as severe, but you still support your leader. You rally around the flag, and you can also, as you just pointed out, you can blame the failings of the communist system, which is what really got Cuba into its current shape, but you can blame that on the U.S. And I think, it's high time that we got rid of these. I think they've had a lot less economic impact than most people think, because a lot of other countries don't agree with this. Like in the case of Saddam Hussein, you had the entire world putting sanctions on, and those didn't work, getting him out of Kuwait. This is sort of anymore, it's a unilateral embargo. Maybe a couple other countries follow it, but mainly a lot of other countries trade with Cuba. So its economic impact, there's still some because the U.S. is so close, but it's really had a counterproductive effect almost from the first day it was imposed because of this rally around the flag effect. And I think the military people are right. Cuba has been no threat since 1991 when the communist bloc fell. So I don't think there's any threat from Cuba. And if we traded with Cuba, you get ideas, you get people going in there, you get relatives mixing, and it puts technology in there, and people start saying, hey, there's an outside world, and we don't want this communist regime anymore.
So why do you think the embargo still exists then? As Kaylin pointed out in her story, President Obama, when he was campaigning, said that he wanted to get rid of it. To this day, he's now allowed Cuban Americans or people with Cuban relatives to kind of travel back and forth more freely. He's allowed some telecommunications companies to open up some minimal services, but really he hasn't done that much to actually get rid of the embargo. Why has it existed for so many years if many people like you would say that, hey, it's had very minimal effect on the Cuban people and it's clearly not working?
Well, I think the main reason is it's domestic political. The Cubans in Florida are very powerful, and they tend to vote Republican, but Florida is a swing state, as we saw in 2000 and even in other elections, and therefore, and it's a pretty close state as far as going either way. And you don't want to antagonize any group if you're a president or you're a party. So even some of the Democrats, and Obama in particular, they don't want to rub the Cubans the wrong way. And many in the Cuban community are coming around to thinking that it's time to do something else, since it's been 50 years and it hasn't worked. But there's still a substantial majority, I think, in the Cuban community that has a hatred of Fidel Castro simply because they're exiles from Cuba. So I think this hatred still is a factor, and most Cubans still want the embargo on, I think. And that's why. They're a very important voting bloc in a very close state, and of course that state can decide U.S. presidential elections and often does. So that's why it is. It's a domestic political thing. It has nothing to do with Cuba and more to do with the United States political system.
And, as we kind of just discussed, it seems like, the United States has sanctions on 13 countries around the world, and it continues to talk about sanctions all the time when it comes to Iran or whatever it is. Yet we keep seeing evidence that perhaps this just isn't a good idea. It doesn't really work. It doesn't really do anything. And maybe it's even kind of impacting the civilians instead of the government, which is really what should be, kind of targeted more. Why does the United States keep talking about sanctions and threatening countries with sanctions if it seems like more and more of these retired officials keep saying, hey, it's not working?
Well, I studied this for my PhD dissertation, and what you find is there's a political aspect to sanctions, and oftentimes the economic effect quickly dissipates, but the political effect is it's too lame or timid to put on diplomatic slap of the wrist or diplomatic protest, and it's too much to go to war or to do covert operations. So the politicians pick the middle ground. It doesn't matter whether the middle ground, it's again for domestic purposes. Sanctions have a lot of effect domestically, but very little on the country that they're designed to go against usually.
Interesting insight. Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow from the Independent Institute, thanks so much.